My life was a grid, a perfect arrangement of quiet, predictable squares. Each day was a replica of the last, built on a foundation of routine that I had mistaken for peace. I was a graphic designer, a profession that suited my solitary nature perfectly. My apartment was my fortress, my studio, my entire world, a meticulously ordered space where the only chaos allowed was the digital kind I created and controlled on my screen. From my window on the third floor, I watched the world move in its messy, unpredictable patterns, and I was content to be an observer, a curator of a life lived at a safe distance. The walls I had built around myself were not made of brick and mortar, but of habit and silence. They were invisible but impenetrable, and I had long since forgotten how to open the door. Then there was him. His name was Alex, and he worked for the internet company. He was a recurring character in the quiet drama of my apartment complex, a tall, steady presence who would appear every few months to fix some unseen problem in the building's wiring closet. I learned his name from the clipped, efficient emails the building manager sent out. Alex from OmniLink will be on site tomorrow. Those emails were the highlight of my month. He was the only disruption I ever welcomed. He was a study in solid lines and quiet confidence, the kind of man who seemed to take up space without apology. Broad shoulders filled the frame of every doorway he passed through, and he moved with a slow, deliberate grace that contradicted the urgency of his job. His hair was dark and always a little messy, as if he'd just run a hand through it. I never saw his face up close for more than a passing moment in the hallway, but I had cataloged the details from my window. The slight furrow in his brow when he was concentrating, the way his mouth would quirk into a half-smile when he spoke into his phone, the sheer physicality of him that seemed so grounded in the real world, a world I only ever simulated on my computer. He was, in the museum of my isolated life, the main exhibit. A masterpiece of classical sculpture I could admire from behind a velvet rope. He was unattainable for a dozen reasons, the most obvious and crushing of which was the simple, unspoken assumption that a man who looked like that, who carried himself with that easy, masculine certainty, would be interested in women. It was a wall higher and thicker than any I could build myself. He was the straight guy from the internet company, a temporary fixture, a beautiful, transient problem solver who existed in a different universe from my own. And so I kept my distance, content to add his fleeting presence to my collection of quiet, unrequited yearnings. I knew the sound of his work boots on the concrete stairs. I knew the low, rumbling timbre of his voice as it carried up from the courtyard, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. Once, I passed him in the narrow hallway as he was leaving, and the air was suddenly filled with the clean, sharp scent of Irish spring soap and something else, something uniquely him, a faint, warm smell like sawdust and clean laundry. The scent clung to the air long after he was gone, a ghost of a presence that made my sterile, controlled apartment feel achingly empty. I would stand in the hallway, breathing it in, a secret act of intimacy that felt both pathetic and profound. My admiration was a silent, one-sided conversation. While I worked, designing logos and layouts with meticulous precision, my mind would drift to him. I imagined the feel of his calloused hands, the warmth of his body standing next to mine, the sound of his quiet laughter. These were fantasies I kept locked away, digital files in a password-protected folder in my mind. They were safe there. They couldn't hurt me. They were just pixels, just code, a harmless simulation of a connection I was too afraid to seek in the real world. My life was ordered, it was safe, and the quiet ache of loneliness was a familiar, manageable pain. It was the price of admission for my safety. I had long ago decided it was a price worth paying. The call came on a Tuesday. Not just any Tuesday, but the Tuesday before the single most important deadline of my career. A full rebranding package for a major client, a project I had poured months of my life into. And, of course, that was the morning my internet decided to die. Not flicker, not slow down, but cease to exist entirely. The little light on my router, usually a comforting blue beacon of connectivity, was a stark, accusatory red. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the carefully constructed calm of my morning routine. I went through the useless ritual of unplugging and replugging, of restarting and resetting, my hands growing clammy, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The digital world I lived in had vanished, leaving me stranded in an analog silence that was deafening. My perfectly grid life was suddenly a blank, terrifying page. My call to OmniLink was a frantic, slightly breathless plea. I explained the situation, the deadline, the sheer, career-ending catastrophe that was unfolding in my quiet apartment. The customer service representative on the other end was a placid sea of corporate sympathy, offering me an appointment 2 days from now. I think I might have actually whimpered. I begged, I pleaded, I offered to pay any fee, to sacrifice my firstborn, anything for a same-day appointment. After a long, agonizing hold, she came back on the line. "We have one technician who just finished a job in your area," she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. "He can be there within the hour. The name is Alex." My heart stopped. It literally just stopped beating for a second, a silent, violent clench in my chest. Then it started again, a frantic, wild drumbeat that was pure, uncut anxiety mixed with a terrifying, exhilarating shot of something that felt dangerously like hope. "Alex, coming here, to my apartment." The exhibit was leaving the museum and coming to my house. The next hour was a blur of frantic, useless activity. I cleaned things that were already clean. I straightened pillows, wiped down counters, and stared at my reflection with a kind of horrified fascination. My hair was a mess. My shirt was wrinkled. I looked like a man who spent his days in a dimly lit room talking to a computer screen, which was, of course, exactly what I was. I changed my shirt 3 times, finally settling on a plain gray t-shirt that seemed the least likely to communicate any form of desperation. When the knock came, it was a solid, confident sound that echoed the man who made it. It vibrated through the floorboards. I took a deep, shaky breath, reminding myself to be normal. Just a customer. A man with a broken utility. Nothing more. I opened the door, and there he was. He was even taller up close. The space in my doorway, which had always felt adequate, suddenly seemed too small. He filled it completely. He wore a dark blue work shirt with the OmniLink logo stitched over the pocket, and his forearms, dusted with dark hair, were tense with muscle. The scent I remembered from the hallway, soap and sawdust, was there, stronger now, more real. It was overwhelming. "Leo?" he asked, and his voice was exactly as I remembered, a low, calm rumble that made the air feel thick. He looked at me, his eyes a warm, clear hazel, and for a moment, I forgot how to speak. "Yes," I finally managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. "Hi, come in." He stepped inside, and my world tilted on its axis. Having him in my carefully curated space felt like letting a wild animal into a library. He brought the outside world in with him. The scent of rain-dampened air, the low hum of the city, a raw, kinetic energy that my apartment had never known. He moved with that same unhurried grace, his eyes scanning the room, taking in my workspace, my pristine shelves, the sterile order of my life. I felt suddenly exposed, as if he could see right through my minimalist decor to the anxious, lonely man hiding behind it. "Routers over here?" he asked, gesturing with a small toolkit he held in one hand. "Yeah, right there," I said, pointing to the corner. I tried everything. He gave me that small, ghost of a smile I'd seen from my window. It was different up close. It reached his eyes. "They always do," he said, and the hint of gentle humor in his voice did something strange to my insides. It was disarming. As he knelt down to inspect the tangle of wires behind my desk, I watched him, unable to look away. The fabric of his shirt stretched tight across his broad back. I could see the subtle shift of muscle as he worked. I was acutely aware of every sound. The soft click of his tools, the rustle of his clothes, the quiet, steady rhythm of his breathing. My own breathing was a shallow, nervous affair. I was an astronomer who had spent years observing a distant star through a telescope, and now that star was in my living room, burning brighter than I could have ever imagined. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, the afternoon light turning a bruised, ominous gray. I hadn't even noticed. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. "Looks like we've got a storm rolling in," he commented, not looking up from his work. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It wasn't in the forecast. Never is, when it's a bad one. He worked with a quiet efficiency that was mesmerizing. There was no wasted movement, no frustration. He was a man who understood how things connected, how to trace a problem to its source and fix it. I, on the other hand, only knew how to create illusions of order. As he worked, the storm outside began to build, a mirror to the tempest brewing inside me. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and their frames. The distant thunder grew closer, angrier, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. He traced the problem from the router, down the wall, to the main connection point near the door. He was muttering to himself, a low stream of technical jargon that was as foreign to me as another language. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the room in a stark, blue-white glare, followed an instant later by a deafening crack of thunder that felt like it was right on top of us. I flinched, a small, involuntary jerk. He looked up at me then, his work forgotten for a moment. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied, my heart pounding in my throat. "Just loud." The rain started then, a few fat drops splattering against the glass, and then a sudden, violent deluge. It came down in solid sheets, a wall of water that blurred the world outside into an impressionist painting. The sound was deafening, a constant, roaring static that filled the apartment. Another flash of lightning, another bone-shaking crack of thunder, and then the lights flickered once, twice, and died. We were plunged into a deep, disorienting darkness. The only light was the faint, gray gloom from the window, and the only sound was the roar of the storm and the sudden, terrifyingly intimate sound of our two sets of breathing in the small, dark room. My perfectly ordered world had just been completely, irrevocably shattered, and the catalyst of that destruction was kneeling on the floor, less than 5 feet away from me. "Well," his voice came out of the blackness, still impossibly calm. "That's not ideal." For a moment, I couldn't respond. The darkness was a physical presence, pressing in on me. My carefully maintained control was gone, washed away by the storm. My internal monologue, usually a constant, buzzing narrator, was just static. White noise. Fear. "I have candles," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strained. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, using its screen to light my way to the kitchen drawer where I kept an emergency stash. My fingers brushed against wax and wick, and I pulled out a thick vanilla-scented candle I'd received as a gift and never used. The tiny flame from my lighter seemed impossibly bright in the oppressive dark. It caught, sputtered, and then grew into a small, steady pool of warm light. I placed it on the coffee table. The flickering glow cast long, dancing shadows across the room, transforming the familiar space into something strange and new. Alex was still kneeling by the wall, his face half in shadow, his expression unreadable. "Looks like I'm not going anywhere for a while," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the roar of the rain. He gestured towards the window, where the street outside was no longer visible, just a churning gray chaos. The news said to stay off the roads. Flash floods. The words hung in the air between us. He was trapped here, with me. The forced proximity I had only ever read about in stories was now my reality. The walls of my fortress had dissolved, and now there was just this small, candlelit space, and him and the storm. "You can stay," I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Obviously. I mean, you have to." He finally stood up, his tall frame seeming to swallow what little light there was. He moved towards the center of the room, closer to the candlelight, and I felt a primal urge to step back, to maintain the distance I was so used to. But I held my ground. "Thanks," he said simply. He looked around the apartment again, his gaze lingering on my face. In the flickering light, his eyes seemed darker, deeper. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," I said, maybe a little too quickly. "It's fine." It was the opposite of fine. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and my entire nervous system felt like it was short-circuiting. An awkward silence fell between us, filled only by the storm's fury. We were two strangers, thrown together by an act of God, and I had no idea what to do. My usual social scripts were useless here. This situation wasn't in my programming. "Are you hungry?" I asked, the question a desperate grab for normalcy. "I could make something. I have a gas stove." He nodded. "Yeah, that would be great. Thank you." Cooking in the near darkness was a surreal experience. I lit another candle for the kitchen counter and moved through the familiar motions of making pasta. It was a simple, comforting task, but my awareness of him was a constant, humming frequency in the back of my mind. He sat at my small dining table, a silent silhouette against the storm-lashed window. I could feel his eyes on me as I moved, a quiet, steady gaze that made the back of my neck prickle with heat. I was hyper-aware of everything. The scent of the vanilla candle mixing with his clean, soapy smell. The way the low light caught the sharp line of his jaw. The almost inaudible sound of his breathing over the roar of the rain. My carefully ordered world had been reduced to these elemental, sensory details, and they were overwhelming. Each small thing was loaded with a significance it didn't deserve. The accidental brush of our hands as I passed him a plate felt like an electric shock, a sudden jolt of warmth that shot up my arm and settled deep in my chest. We ate in near silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates a small, domestic sound in the midst of the storm's symphony. The silence wasn't entirely uncomfortable, though. It was heavy, charged with unspoken things, but it wasn't empty. "So, you're a graphic designer," he said, breaking the quiet. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I replied, surprised. "How did you know?" "Saw your setup," he said, gesturing with his fork towards my desk. "Big monitors, drawing tablet. Figured you weren't just using it for email." I managed a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Guilty. Must be nice, working from home." "It has its perks," I said. "And its downsides, the loneliness, the isolation. The way the walls could sometimes feel like they were closing in." I didn't say any of that, of course. "I get that," he said, and his voice was softer now. "Sometimes I'm out on calls all day, and I don't have a real conversation with anyone. Just, is it fixed yet?" It was a small thing, a crack in the stoic, competent facade, a glimpse of a shared loneliness. It was the first time I had ever thought of him as someone who might feel the same things I did. The exhibit in the museum was suddenly looking back at me, and I realized with a jolt that he wasn't made of marble at all. He was real. "I'm not great with storms," he admitted after another long pause, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it over the rain. He wasn't looking at me, but at the candle flame, his eyes reflecting the tiny, dancing light. "My childhood home got hit pretty bad by a hurricane once. We were in the basement for 2 days. There it was, a piece of himself, offered up in the darkness. A raw, unpolished vulnerability that he had no reason to share with me, a stranger. The knowledge settled inside me, warm and heavy. It deepened the lines of the sketch I had made of him in my mind, adding shading and texture I never knew was there. He wasn't just the handsome, capable technician. He was a man who was afraid of storms. A man with a past. A man who was, in this moment, trusting me with a small piece of his fear. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words felt real, not just a polite platitude. "That sounds terrifying." He finally looked up and met my eyes across the table. The half-smile was back, but it was different this time. Wistful. "It was a long time ago," he said. "But the sound, it always brings it back." And in that moment, something shifted between us. The professional barrier, the customer-technician dynamic, it all dissolved into the candlelit darkness. We were just two people, taking refuge from a storm, both inside and out. The physical distance between us at the small table suddenly felt charged, a space crackling with a new kind of energy. I felt a desperate, insane urge to reach across the table and touch his hand, to offer some kind of comfort. But I didn't. The fear was still stronger than the desire. The walls, though damaged, were still standing. Hours passed. The storm raged on, a relentless assault of wind and rain. We talked. Not about anything important, really. We talked about movies, about terrible jobs we'd had, about the city. The conversation flowed easily, a quiet river in the dark, and with every word, the tension in my shoulders eased just a little. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that took me by surprise, and I found myself laughing, a real, unforced sound that felt foreign in my silent apartment. It grew late. The candles burned low, the wax pooling around the wicks. The adrenaline from the initial crisis had faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a humming, persistent awareness of our situation. There was only one bed. This was the logical, terrifying conclusion of the evening. The thought had been lurking in the back of my mind all night, a monster in the closet. Now, the closet door was creaking open. "I'm getting tired," I said, breaking a comfortable silence. It was an admission and also a test. He stretched, his arms reaching above his head, and the movement was so fluid and unself-conscious it made my breath catch. "Yeah, me too. You should take the bed," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I can take the couch. It's not that uncomfortable." It was a lie. The couch was a lumpy instrument of torture. He looked from me to the couch, then back again. He shook his head slowly. "No way. It's your place. I'm the one crashing here." "I insist," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I was trying to rebuild one of my walls, the wall of polite, detached hospitality. "So do I," he countered, his gaze steady. Then he said the words that would undo me completely. "Look, it's a big bed. We're both adults. I'm sure we can share it without any trouble." Trouble. The word was a lit match in a room full of dynamite. My mind went completely blank. Sharing a bed with him. The fantasy I had kept locked away in the most secret part of my mind was being offered to me as a practical solution to a logistical problem. It felt like a trap. A beautiful, terrifying trap. "Are you sure?" I asked, and my voice was a reedy whisper. "I'm sure if you are," he said, and his eyes held mine, a silent question in their depths. "Are you okay with this?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. A single, jerky motion. The process of getting ready for bed was an excruciating exercise in forced nonchalance. We took turns in the bathroom, the brief closing of the door a temporary reprieve from the suffocating tension. When it was my turn, I stared at my reflection in the dark mirror, barely visible in the light from my phone. My eyes were wide, my face pale. Who was this person, agreeing to share a bed with the man he'd been secretly obsessed with for months? The orderly, cautious person I thought I was would never do this. When I came out, he was already in the bed, lying on his side, his back to me. He'd taken off his work shirt and was just in his undershirt and jeans. The candlelight from the living room cast a faint glow into the bedroom, illuminating the powerful curve of his shoulders and the line of his spine. The sight was so intimate, so devastatingly real, that I had to physically stop myself from turning around and fleeing to the couch. I slipped into the other side of the bed, moving with as much stealth as I could manage. The mattress dipped under my weight, and I was intensely aware of the small movement it must have created, of how it must have shifted him closer to me, even if only by a fraction of an inch. I lay on my back, rigid, staring up at the dark ceiling, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The space between us was a chasm, a vast, empty expanse of mattress. But it was also a live wire. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a tangible presence in the cool night air. I could hear the soft, steady sound of his breathing, a rhythm that was so close, so real. The scent of him, soap and rain and warm skin, was all around me, an intoxicating cloud. We lay there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The storm outside had softened, the rain now a steady, drumming rhythm on the roof, the thunder a distant, grumbling echo. The quiet in the room was louder than the storm had ever been. It was filled with everything we weren't saying. I don't know how long we lay like that. Time had ceased to have any meaning. There was only the darkness, the sound of his breathing, and the frantic, silent screaming of my own thoughts. This was a mistake. I had misread everything. He was just being practical, and I was turning it into something else, something it wasn't. Then he shifted. The small movement sent a jolt through my entire body. He turned over, slowly, deliberately, to face me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I could feel his presence more acutely now, the warmth of him closer, the air between us charged and thick. His hand moved, a slow, hesitant motion across the sheet that separated us. His fingers brushed against mine. It was the lightest of touches, a whisper of contact, but it was like a lightning strike directly to my heart. It was not an accident. It couldn't have been. It was a question. I held my breath, my mind a whirlwind of panic and hope. This was it, the point of no return. The moment where I could either retreat back behind my walls, or I could finally, for the first time in my life, step outside of them. Slowly, I uncurled my fingers and met his touch. His hand closed around mine, his calloused palm warm and firm against my own. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a small, reassuring gesture that spoke volumes in the silent darkness. And with that simple, profound act of connection, all the anxiety, all the fear, it just melted away. It was replaced by a feeling so intense, so overwhelming, it left me breathless. He moved closer, the mattress shifting under his weight. I could feel the heat of his body along the entire length of mine. His face was just inches from my own, a pale shape in the gloom. I could see the faint glint of his eyes, feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. "Leo," he whispered, his voice a rough, low sound that was for me and me alone. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a hard or demanding kiss. It was slow, tentative, a question asked with lips instead of words. It was soft and searching, and it tasted of rain and vanilla, and a hope so sharp it was almost painful. My perfectly ordered world, the one that had been cracking and splintering all night, finally shattered into a million incandescent pieces. The walls came down not with a bang, but with a quiet, yielding sigh. I kissed him back, pouring all the months of silent yearning, all the secret, hopeless admiration, into that one impossible kiss. It was like coming home to a place I had never been before. It was everything. The morning after was a cold, cruel dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was scrubbed clean and painfully bright. The sunlight that streamed through my window felt harsh, intrusive, a spotlight on the wreckage of the night before. The power was back on, and the apartment was filled with the familiar, humming silence of my appliances, a sound that now felt alien and mocking. The magic of the candlelit darkness had evaporated with the morning light. In its place was a thick, suffocating awkwardness that was more oppressive than any storm. Alex was already awake when I opened my eyes. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me, already dressed in his work shirt from the day before. He was pulling on his boots, the familiar, solid sound now laced with a new and terrible finality. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. My heart, which had felt so full and light just hours before, plummeted into a cold, dark pit in my stomach. The anxiety I had managed to banish came rushing back, a tidal wave of doubt and regret. It was a mistake. The thought was a relentless, punishing chant in my head, a moment of weakness, of storm-induced madness. He was just being kind, and I had taken it as something more. He regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. I had been a fool, projecting my own pathetic fantasies onto a situation that was nothing more than a logistical inconvenience for him. "The internet should be back on," he said, his voice flat, professional. It was the voice of Alex from OmniLink, not the man who had whispered my name in the dark. It was a problem with the line down the street. The outage reset it. "Oh," I said, my own voice a pathetic croak. "Good." He stood up and walked into the living room. I followed him, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor, feeling like a ghost in my own home. He gathered his tools with a brisk, efficient energy, avoiding my eyes, his movements clipped and precise. The easy, comfortable space we had shared the night before was gone, replaced by an invisible wall, thicker and more impenetrable than any I had ever built myself. The physical distance between us as he moved around my small apartment felt like miles. A vast, unbridgeable canyon of regret and awkwardness. My mind was a racetrack of frantic, spiraling thoughts. I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line. I had made him uncomfortable. Now, even the small, safe pleasure of seeing him in the hallway was gone forever. I would have to live with the memory of his rejection, the shame of my own foolishness. I wanted to say something, to apologize, to rewind time, and take it all back. But the words were stuck in my throat, a hard, painful lump. He finished packing his toolkit and walked to the door. This was it. He was going to leave, and we would never speak of it again. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting ache in my chest. He would walk out that door and back into his world, and I would be left here, in the ruins of mine. He put his hand on the doorknob, and my stomach clenched. Then he stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his back still to me, his shoulders rigid. The silence stretched, thin and taut, ready to snap. Then he turned around. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all morning. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions. There was anxiety there, and uncertainty, but there was something else, too. Something that looked an awful lot like the same fear I was feeling. "We need to talk," he said, and his voice was low and serious. The words were a death sentence. My blood ran cold. This was the part where he let me down easy, where he apologized for the misunderstanding and made a quick, clean exit, leaving me to piece myself back together. I braced myself for the impact, wrapping my arms around myself as if to hold my fracturing composure in place. "Okay," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the floor. I couldn't bear to see the pity in his. He took a step away from the door, back into the room, back into my space. "Last night," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his messy hair. It was the first sign of uncertainty I had ever seen from him. I shouldn't have been so quiet this morning. I'm sorry." I looked up, confused. That wasn't what I was expecting. "I woke up," he continued, his gaze intense, and I panicked. I thought maybe I had misread everything. That you were just being nice because I was stuck here, and I took advantage of that." My mind struggled to process his words. He was afraid. He thought he had misread the situation. "I've wanted to talk to you for months, Leo," he said, and my name on his lips was still a small shock. Every time I had a call in this building, I was hoping I'd run into you in the hall. It's stupid, I know. "No," I breathed, the word coming out on a rush of air I didn't realize I'd been holding. "When the call came in for your apartment yesterday, I made sure I was the one who took it. I told my dispatcher my previous job was finished, even though it wasn't." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I was going to come here, fix your internet, make some awkward small talk, and then leave, just like every other time. But then the storm." He looked at me, and all the pretense, all the professional distance, was gone. His eyes were wide open, vulnerable. "Last night wasn't a mistake for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was the scariest, best thing that's ever happened to me. And this morning, I was terrified that for you, it was just a mistake. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." The relief that washed over me was so total, so profound, it made me dizzy. It was like a dam breaking inside me, a flood of emotion that was so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, the story of my foolishness and his regret, was wrong. It was all wrong. He had felt it too. He had been just as scared, just as uncertain as I was. "A mistake." I finally found my voice, and it was shaky but clear. "Alex, I've been replaying our 5-second conversations in the hallway for the last 6 months. I know the sound of your boots on the stairs. I know you smell like Irish spring soap." A small, watery laugh escaped me. "Last night was the furthest thing from a mistake." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. It was a real smile this time, wide and unreserved, and it transformed his entire expression. It was like the sun coming out after the storm. The relief in his eyes mirrored my own. "Good," he said, his voice soft. "That's really good to hear." He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. He raised his hand, his movement slow, as if asking for permission, and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric, grounding me, chasing away the last of the morning's chill. "So," he murmured, his smile turning into a conspiratorial grin. "What happens now?" "I have no idea," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "My whole life is a grid. You're not on the grid. Maybe we can draw a new grid," he said. "Together." And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no questioning. It was sure and deep and certain, a confirmation of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. It was a kiss full of relief and promise, a kiss that tasted like a new beginning. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of the night before. This was calm. It was right. It felt like coming home. He didn't leave. He took his hand off the doorknob and closed the door with a soft, decisive click. He stayed for coffee. He stayed for lunch. He called his dispatcher and told them he wouldn't be in for the rest of the day. He was using a sick day, he told me with a wink, because he had come down with something serious. We spent the day in a bubble of quiet discovery. The awkwardness of the morning was a distant memory, replaced by a comfortable, easy intimacy that felt both brand new and years old. We sat on my couch, the couch I was so sure I'd be sleeping on alone, and we talked for hours. He told me about his family, about his dream of opening his own workshop to build custom furniture. I told him about my work, about my passion for design, and even about the loneliness I so rarely admitted to anyone, least of all myself. It was strange, learning the details of the man I had only ever observed from a distance. Learning that his favorite color was forest green, that he hated cilantro, that he had a ridiculously loud laugh when he found something truly funny. Each new fact was a brushstroke, adding color and depth to the black and white photograph I had carried in my mind for so long. He was no longer an exhibit in my museum. He was real, and he was sitting next to me, his knee brushing against mine, his presence a warm, solid anchor in my once drifting life. Late in the afternoon, as the sun cast long golden stripes across the floor, he looked over at my workstation. "So, did you make your deadline?" he asked. I had completely forgotten about it. The career-ending catastrophe that had set this whole, impossible chain of events into motion. I checked my email. The client had sent a message that morning, during the storm, saying their servers were down and the deadline was extended by a week. I laughed, a loud, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. "Yeah," I said, looking back at him. "I guess the storm saved us both." His smile was soft. "I guess it did." That evening, he cooked dinner. He moved around my kitchen with a confidence and familiarity that was both startling and deeply comforting. He made a mess, splashing tomato sauce on the counter and using far too many pans, and I found that I didn't mind. The disruption to my pristine, ordered space felt right. It felt like life. As we ate, he paused and looked at me, a playful glint in his eye. "Are you sure you don't want the middle of the bed tonight?" he teased. I felt a blush creep up my neck, but I smiled back. "I'm sure we can come to a better arrangement this time." The new beginning was quiet. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic overhaul of my life. It was a series of small, significant moments. It was him leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. It was me learning to make coffee the way he liked it. It was the comfortable silence of us reading on the couch together, his leg thrown over mine. It was the inside jokes, the shared glances, the slow and steady process of two separate lives beginning to intertwine. My life was no longer a perfect, sterile grid. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was unpredictable. Alex had walked in with the storm and had shown me that the walls I had built to keep the chaos out were also the walls that had kept the joy out. He hadn't just fixed my Wi-Fi. He had reconnected me to the world, and to a part of myself I thought I had lost forever. Sometimes, when it rains, I'll look at him and remember that first night. The fear, the darkness, the impossible hope. I had always believed that safety lay in order, in the predictable and the known. But I was wrong. The greatest risk I ever took was letting him stay, and it led me to the safest place I have ever known, right here, next to him. The storm had passed, but for the first time in my life, I felt the sun.